"Mommy, why is that man eating from the trash?" The little girl's innocent question stopped her mother in her tracks. She looked up, eyes wide, pointing at a stranger hunched beside a bin. What happened next would change all of their lives forever. This is the story of how a millionaire single mom took him home and discovered something far greater than wealth. But before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop it down in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in. It was one of those afternoons when the sun seemed to linger in the sky a little longer, casting golden light across the sidewalks and warming everything it touched. Amelia heartily walked hand in hand with her daughter, Lila, their steps light after a playful day at the park. For Amelia, these were the moments she cherished most. The laughter of her little girl, the way Lila's curls bounced as she skipped beside her, the simple peace of a quiet walk home. But life has a way of placing the unexpected right in front of us, in the most ordinary moments. As they turned down a quieter street, Lila's steps slowed, her bright green eyes fixed on something in the narrow alley ahead. She tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy, why is that man eating from the trash?" The question hung in the air like a sudden chill. Amelia froze for a moment, caught off guard by the blunt honesty of her child's words. Slowly, she turned her head, and that's when she saw him. A man crouched beside a bin, his shoulders tense, his movements careful. He wasn't rummaging with wild desperation, but with restraint, as though dignity still guided every motion, even in this moment of need. Dark hair fell across his rugged face, and when he glanced up, hazel eyes met hers, eyes that carried both weariness and something unbroken, a flicker of strength buried beneath hardship. Amelia's first instinct could have been to look away, to pull her daughter closer and hurry on, but she didn't. Something in her heart wouldn't let her. Lila's small hand tightened around hers, grounding her in that moment. The child's gaze carried no judgment, only a pure, innocent concern. And in that tender silence, Amelia realized this was not just a fleeting encounter. This was the beginning of a choice that would ripple through all their lives. Because sometimes, a single question spoken by a child can open the door to a story no one could have imagined. Amelia's heart ached as she stood there in the quiet street, her daughter's question still echoing in the air. The man by the trash bin lowered his gaze, as though ashamed of being seen, and turned slightly as if to shield what little pride he had left. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, a silence heavy with unspoken thoughts, one that most people would have filled by simply walking away. Amelia could have tightened her grip on Lila's hand, whispered, "Come along," and carried on toward the safety of home. That would have been the easy choice, the expected one. But something inside her refused. She stepped forward, slowly, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The man noticed, his eyes narrowing in quiet caution. He straightened his back, still holding a crumpled piece of bread he had salvaged. There was no aggression in his stance, only a guarded dignity. "Are you hungry?" Amelia's voice came gentle, almost hesitant, as though afraid her words might wound him further. For a brief moment, the man didn't answer. His hazel eyes flickered with a mix of emotions, pride, weariness, gratitude, but mostly hesitation. He looked at her as though trying to decide if this was pity or something else. Finally, his voice came, deep and low. "I'll manage." The words carried strength, yet underneath them lay the unmistakable tremor of someone fighting a battle far too heavy to carry alone. Amelia's hand tightened around Lila's. Her daughter tilted her head, watching with unfiltered innocence. And then, in her small but certain voice, she spoke again. "You don't have to eat from the trash. Mommy makes really good food." The man's expression shifted, surprise softening into something fragile, almost childlike. His lips parted, but no sound came. He blinked, lowering his eyes, as though those simple, guileless words had pierced through the armor he wore. Amelia felt her throat tighten. Compassion swelled in her chest, stronger than caution, louder than doubt. She took a breath, steadying her voice. "My home isn't far. You don't have to explain anything. Just come with us. Share a meal." He shook his head, lightly torn. Pride wrestled against hunger, against loneliness. For a moment, Amelia thought he would turn and vanish into the shadows of the alley. And then, Lila smiled, the kind of smile that only a child could give, full of trust, full of warmth, untouched by the world hardness. She reached out her tiny hand, not to pull him, but to invite him. The man hesitated, his breath catching. Slowly, as though gravity itself guided him, he nodded. "All right," he whispered. Amelia's lips curved faintly. "I don't even know your name," she said softly. He lowered his gaze for a moment, then lifted it again. "Gabriel." "Well then, Gabriel," she murmured, almost to herself. "Let's go." And just like that, a choice was made. A choice that would alter 3 lives forever. What began as a walk home from the park had now become something far greater, a step into the unknown, bound by compassion and lit by the innocent courage of a child heart. The ride home was quiet, though not in an uncomfortable way. Gabriel sat in the back seat, his posture careful, almost too proper, as though afraid to take up more space than he should. Lila hummed a tune from the park, swinging her legs, blissfully unaware of the tension that lingered in the air. Amelia kept her eyes on the road, her thoughts circling faster than the wheels beneath them. She had invited a stranger into her home, but something told her this was no ordinary man. By the time they reached the house, evening sunlight was spilling across the Hartley estate, washing the tall windows in a golden glow. Amelia opened the door, stepping aside so Gabriel could enter. He paused at the threshold, hesitant, his gaze flicking over the polished floors and soft light within. For someone who had been surviving on the streets, the sheer warmth of the space seemed overwhelming. "You can come in," Amelia said softly, noticing his hesitation. Gabriel gave a small nod, then stepped inside, careful, as though afraid his presence might somehow disturb the peace of the home. Dinner was already simmering in the kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filling the air. Amelia moved with quiet grace as she set the table, while Gabriel stood nearby, unsure where to put himself. His strong frame looked out of place in such an elegant setting, but his eyes carried a humility that softened the contrast. Lila skipped to the table, climbing onto a chair, her curls bouncing. She grinned at Gabriel. "You can sit next to me." The words broke some of the stiffness in the air. Gabriel allowed the faintest smile, a flicker of gratitude, and lowered himself into the chair beside her. When Amelia placed the food on the table, Gabriel's gaze followed every movement. The chicken, the vegetables, the bread. Things so ordinary in Amelia's world, yet so rare, so precious in his. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain composed. Amelia served him a plate, her hand steady, though her heart ached at the sight of his restraint. He didn't dive in. He didn't devour. Instead, he took the fork carefully, cutting small pieces, eating slowly, as if each bite was an act of respect. "Is it good?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Gabriel set his fork down briefly, nodding once. "It's more than good. Thank you." His voice was quiet but sincere, carrying a depth that silenced the room for a moment. Amelia met his gaze across the table, her blue eyes softening. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps even discomfort, but instead she found herself watching a man who carried himself with a quiet dignity, even in the face of hunger. Lila, ever unfiltered, leaned forward. "Do you have a family?" The question landed with the innocence of a child, yet the weight of something much larger. Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. He lowered his eyes, searching for words, then shook his head faintly. "Not anymore." The room grew still. Amelia's hand froze mid-motion. She wanted to ask more, but she could see the shadow in his eyes, the kind that told a story too heavy for this moment. So instead, she offered him a gentle smile. "You're welcome to stay for as long as you need." For the first time that evening, Gabriel's shoulders eased just slightly. He looked between Amelia and Lila, and though he didn't say it aloud, something shifted within him. A warmth he hadn't felt in years began to stir. The dinner table, once just another part of Amelia's routine life, had now become the setting of something extraordinary. It was the first time in a long while that Gabriel had eaten with others. The first time in even longer that he felt seen not as a burden, but as a man. And as laughter slowly returned to the table, Lila's giggles, Amelia's soft chuckles, he allowed himself, just for a moment, to imagine what it might be like to belong again. The days that followed unfolded quietly, almost gently, as though life itself was testing the waters of this unlikely bond. Gabriel had not planned to stay beyond that first meal. He had told himself it was only for a night, just long enough to regain his strength before disappearing back into the shadows of the city. But somehow, morning came, and he was still there. Amelia didn't press him. She moved through her home as she always did, graceful, steady, focused on her daughter, but she noticed things. She noticed the way Gabriel's eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but with a craftsman's attention. She noticed how, when he thought no one was looking, he straightened the shoes by the door or lifted a chair that wobbled just slightly. One afternoon, Amelia returned from her study to find him crouched in the hallway, tightening the hinges on a squeaky door that had annoyed her for months. He looked up, caught in the act, and offered the faintest smile. "It kept sticking," he said quietly, as if to excuse his presence. Amelia tilted her head, warmth flickering in her expression. "I suppose it did. Thank you." That became the rhythm of his days, small, almost invisible acts of gratitude. He carried groceries in from the car before she could lift them. He fixed a loose board on the porch. When Lila left her toys scattered across the lawn, Gabriel gathered them up without a word, lining them neatly against the wall. Lila noticed too. She began to follow him, trailing behind like a curious shadow. When he raked leaves in the yard, she held a smaller rake, her giggles filling the air. When he repaired the handle on her favorite dollhouse, her eyes lit up with admiration. "You're like a hero," she declared one evening, watching him tighten the last screw. Gabriel chuckled, though the sound was low and unfamiliar, as though laughter had been a stranger to him for too long. "I don't think heroes usually fix dollhouses." "They do if it makes someone happy," Lila insisted, her grin wide and certain. Amelia stood in the doorway, unseen for a moment, and her chest tightened. There was something in the way her daughter looked at him, a trust, a warmth that spoke louder than words. And there was something in the way Gabriel looked back at Lila, gentle and patient, that told Amelia he wasn't just helping out obligation. He was giving what he could because he wanted to. Late at night, when the house grew quiet, Amelia found herself reflecting. She was a woman who had more than enough. And yet here was a man who had so little, offering pieces of himself that money could never buy, his time, his strength, his care. It humbled her. It moved her. Gabriel, on the other hand, never spoke of repayment. He didn't boast, didn't linger on what he had done. Each small act was given and then released, as if gratitude lived best in silence. And in that silence, something began to grow, fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. A sense of belonging, a sense of family. The house no longer felt the same as it had before his arrival. It felt warmer, steadier, more alive. And though no one dared say it aloud, all three of them could feel it. Gabriel was no longer just a guest. He was becoming something more. The house had grown quieter after Lila drifted off to sleep. Her giggles, her questions, her boundless energy, now tucked away beneath blankets and dreams. Amelia stood alone in the hallway for a moment, listening to the steady hush of night settling over the estate. The ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance reminded her that time kept moving forward, even when her thoughts stood still. She moved into the sitting room, the soft glow of a lamp painting warm light across polished shelves and framed photographs. She lowered herself onto the couch, hands folded in her lap, eyes distant. It was in these quiet hours that Amelia allowed herself to feel what she often pushed aside during the day. The truth was, despite her wealth, despite her accomplishments, despite the carefully built image of a confident woman who had everything, there was still an ache inside her, an ache that came from nights spent alone at this very table, from the empty place beside her in bed, from the absence of a partner who could share the weight of her world. She had told herself for years that love was not something she needed, that raising Lila, building her business, and securing their future was enough. But the silence of the house after laughter had faded always betrayed her. And now, in that silence, her thoughts drifted again to Gabriel. She saw him not as he had appeared in the alley that day, crouched by a trash bin, but as he had revealed himself since. Patient with Lila, respectful with her, quietly strong in ways she had not expected. She thought of the squeaky door he had fixed, the groceries he carried without being asked, the way he made space for himself in their home without ever demanding it. More than that, she thought of the look in his eyes whenever Lila spoke to him, that softening, that quiet reverence, as though her daughter's joy was enough to heal something deep inside him. Amelia pressed a hand lightly to her chest, surprised by how much it stirred her. She admired his resilience. She admired his humility. And somewhere deep inside, she admired the way he carried himself with dignity, even when life had stripped so much away from him. But alongside admiration came fear. Fear of what this meant. Fear of what she was allowing herself to feel. He was a stranger still, a man with a past she did not yet know. What if she was reading too much into kindness? What if compassion was blurring into something more dangerous, something that could break her heart again? She leaned back into the cushions, closing her eyes, letting out a slow breath. The war inside her was one she knew well, between the guarded woman who had built walls around her soul and the lonely one who longed for someone to see her, not just a fortune, not just a surface, but the woman beneath it all. And then she remembered the way Gabriel had looked at her across the dinner table that first night. Not at her clothes, not at her house, not at her wealth. At her, just her. That memory lingered, quiet but powerful. For the first time in a long while, Amelia allowed herself to imagine what if he wasn't just a guest passing through? What if this man, broken, yet unbroken, wasn't someone she had rescued, but someone who might rescue her too? The thought brought both warmth and fear, twining together in her chest. She opened her eyes again, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the darkened window. A woman of elegance, a mother, yes, but also a woman still capable of hope. The night stretched on, carrying her reflection into silence. And in that silence, Amelia understood something she hadn't wanted to admit. Gabriel Stone was no longer just a man she had chosen to help. He was becoming someone her heart could no longer ignore. The morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, but Gabriel's heart felt anything but calm. He stood in the guest room, a small bag on the bed, worn and nearly empty, just a few belongings he had managed to keep through years of struggle. His hands lingered on the zipper, hesitant yet firm. He had told himself this would happen eventually, that no matter how kind Amelia had been, no matter how much Lila's laughter warmed the hollow corners of his heart, this wasn't his place. This wasn't his life. He couldn't stay. Down the hallway, Lila's voice carried, bright and cheerful as she played with her dolls. Amelia's lighter footsteps followed, moving through the house with practiced grace. He could picture them, Amelia in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, Lila skipping into the room with endless energy. A scene of home, of family, of belonging, and it was exactly why he needed to leave. He couldn't risk becoming dependent on their kindness. Couldn't risk letting them see too much of the man he had been before his life unraveled. Pride gnawed at him, whispering that staying would mean weakness, that he was nothing more than a burden being carried. He closed his eyes, tightening his jaw. Better to walk away now, before the ties grew stronger. But when he stepped into the hall, bag in hand, he wasn't met with silence. Lila spotted him instantly. Her green eyes widened and her little mouth fell open. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. Gabriel froze, his breath catching. He hadn't prepared for this. "Just taking a walk," he muttered, his voice lower than usual. But children have a way of seeing truth, of hearing what is not said. Lila's lips trembled. She looked at the bag, then back at him. "You're leaving?" Tears welled in her eyes before he could even answer. She dropped her doll and ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Don't go. Please, don't go." The weight of her words hit him harder than any hardship he'd endured on the streets. His arms hovered awkwardly at first, then slowly lowered, resting gently around her shoulders. His throat burned. Amelia appeared then, drawn by the sound. Her gaze fell on the bag, then lifted to his face. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She simply asked quietly but firmly, "Gabriel, why?" He met her eyes, those kind blue eyes that had seen him at his lowest. Shame pulled at him. "You've already done enough. I can't stay here. Amelia, I don't belong. You don't need me weighing you down." Amelia stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with something deeper, something he hadn't expected. "We don't see you as a weight. Not me, and certainly not Lila." She glanced at her daughter, clinging tightly to his side, tears streaking her cheeks. "Look at her, Gabriel. She's not asking you to fix anything. She's not asking you to be perfect. She's asking you to stay because you matter to her, because you matter to us." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Gabriel's chest rose and fell as he fought the battle within him, the war between pride and the undeniable need for connection. For the first time in years, someone wanted him not for what he could provide, not for who he used to be, but simply for him. His grip on the bag loosened. The old leather sagged toward the floor. Lila's sob softened when she realized he hadn't pulled away. Amelia's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Don't let pride steal this from you. Don't let it steal this from her." The fight drained from him, replaced by something raw, something vulnerable. He set the bag down. His knees bent, lowering himself to Lila's height, and he cupped her cheek gently, brushing away a tear. "I'll stay," he whispered. His voice cracked, but it was enough. Lila smiled through her tears, throwing her arms around his neck. And behind her, Amelia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In that moment, Gabriel understood something he had resisted for far too long. Staying didn't mean weakness. It didn't mean losing himself. It meant finally allowing himself to be seen, to be cared for, to belong. And with that single choice, the fragile threads that bound them grew stronger, weaving the first strand of family he never thought he would have again. The days began to blend into something softer, something warmer. What had started as a fragile arrangement slowly grew into the rhythm of a life shared. Gabriel was no longer the stranger by the trash bin. He was there at breakfast, at bedtime, in the laughter that now filled the corners of the house. It showed first in the little moments. Lila racing through the yard with her bike, her curls flying behind her, Amelia calling out encouragement from the porch. Gabriel walked beside the little girl, steadying the handlebars when her balance faltered. "Don't look at the ground," he coached gently, his voice calm and sure. "Eyes ahead. Trust yourself." And when she finally wobbled forward on her own, squealing with delight, Gabriel's grin broke across his face, unrestrained, genuine, as though her victory was his own. In the evenings, they would gather in the kitchen, Amelia chopping vegetables, Gabriel washing dishes with sleeves rolled up, water dripping down his forearms. Lila perched on a stool, telling stories from school, her voice animated. Amelia would glance at Gabriel from time to time, catching the way he leaned in to listen to every detail, nodding as though each word mattered. And for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't carrying the weight of these simple moments alone. Even the quiet became different. Gabriel reading one of Lila's picture books aloud, his deep voice turning simple sentences into something grand. Amelia sitting nearby, pretending to be busy with paperwork, though her eyes lingered on him more often than not. She noticed the patience in his tone, the way his expression softened when Lila giggled at the funny parts. There were harder days, too, nights when Gabriel's past pressed heavily on him, when shadows clouded his hazel eyes. Amelia could see it, even when he tried to hide it. He would step outside, standing alone beneath the stars, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. And though he rarely spoke what weighed on him, Amelia sometimes joined him there, standing close but not pressing him. Just her presence beside him, just silence shared. In those moments, words weren't necessary. Lila, of course, saw none of the heaviness. To her, Gabriel was simply her hero, the one who lifted her onto his shoulders when she was too tired to walk, the one who fixed her broken kite, and then ran across the lawn with her, chasing the wind until both of them collapsed in laughter. And to Amelia, he was becoming something she hadn't dared to imagine, a partner not in title but in spirit, someone who noticed the details she thought no one saw, the way she rubbed her temples after a long day, the quiet sigh she let out when she thought no one was listening. He never asked, never intruded, but his presence itself was a comfort, steady and grounding. The house itself seemed to change. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried voices, 2, then 3, woven together like threads of a tapestry. Mealtime stretched longer, filled with stories and laughter. Even ordinary chores felt lighter when done together. For Gabriel, each passing day chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. For Amelia, each passing day reminded her of the woman she still was beneath the armor of wealth and responsibility. And for Lila, it was simple. She was just happy. Happy to have her mother's smile return. Happy to have someone strong and kind to call her hero. What none of them said aloud, but all of them felt deep within, was that something fragile and extraordinary was taking shape. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of love, out of belonging, out of the quiet, steady building of a family. The night air was cool, touched with a faint scent of jasmine drifting from nearby gardens. A soft breeze rustled the trees along the quiet street as Amelia, Lila, and Gabriel walked side by side, their steps unhurried. The glow of the street lamp spilled pools of golden light onto the pavement, breaking the darkness into gentle fragments. Lila swung between them, her small hands clasped tightly in theirs. Her laughter rang out as she kicked at the fallen leaves, the sound carrying into the night like a song. Amelia's heart warmed at the sight, yet her eyes often drifted sideways toward Gabriel, toward the man who had somehow gone from stranger to protector, from guest to something far more complicated. They reached a stretch where the road grew quieter, the hum of the city fading into stillness. Lila skipped a few steps ahead, humming a tune, leaving Amelia and Gabriel walking side by side. Gabriel slowed, his gaze fixed on the ground for a moment. As though wrestling with words, he wasn't sure he had the right to speak. Finally, he stopped beneath the amber glow of a street lamp. The light caught his features, the rugged lines of his face, the weight in his hazel eyes, but also the vulnerability he rarely allowed to show. "Amelia," he began softly, his voice low, steady, but carrying something raw beneath it. She turned toward him, brows knitting gently, sensing the gravity in his tone. He drew in a breath, the kind that steadied a man before a leap. "There's something I need to say, something I've been holding back." Amelia's heart quickened. The air around them seemed to pause, even the breeze stilled. Gabriel's eyes lifted to hers, unflinching now, though shadowed with emotion. "When you found me that day, I was at my lowest. I had nothing, no hope, no reason to believe life could ever be more than surviving one day at a time. But you," his voice caught, forcing him to swallow before continuing. "You saw me, not for what I had become, but for the man I still could be." Amelia's breath trembled. She hadn't realized how much those words would pierce her. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice softer, almost reverent. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Dignity, purpose, a place of family. You and Lila, you've given me more than I deserve. And I don't know if I'll ever find a way to repay that." Her lips parted, her eyes shimmering under the glow of the lamp. But before she could speak, he added, almost in a whisper, "The truth is, I don't want to walk this road alone anymore. Not when I could walk it with you." The silence that followed was thick, but not empty. It was alive with meaning. Amelia felt her chest tighten, her throat constrict. She had built walls around her heart for years, telling herself love was something she no longer needed. But here in the stillness of Quiet Street, those walls began to crumble. She stepped closer, close enough that the glow of the lamp framed them together. Her blue eyes held his with steady warmth. "Gabriel, you don't have to repay me. I never asked for that. All I wanted was for you to see what I saw from the very beginning." Her voice softened, her words laced with emotion. "A good man, a strong man, someone worthy of love, of belonging. I saw that in you before you saw it in yourself." Gabriel's breath shuddered, the weight of her words sinking deep. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as if drawn by something greater than choice, he leaned in. Amelia did not pull away. Her lips met his in a kiss both tender and trembling, gentle, yet filled with all the unspoken truths they had carried for so long. A small giggle broke the moment. Lila had turned back, her eyes wide and delighted as she clasped their hands together in hers. "I knew it," she exclaimed, laughter bubbling from her like music. Amelia and Gabriel pulled back, both smiling through the emotion that lingered in their eyes. Gabriel reached down, his calloused hand wrapping around Lila's tiny fingers. Amelia's hand joined theirs, the three of them standing together beneath the golden glow of the street lamp. For the first time, it wasn't just Amelia and her daughter walking home. It wasn't just Gabriel finding shelter from night. It was something greater, something whole. A family beginning to take shape beneath the stars. The days that followed moved with a different kind of rhythm. What once felt temporary, uncertain, had begun to settle into something lasting, something real. The Hartley home, once spacious but filled with quiet, now carried the constant hum of togetherness. Footsteps echoing across polished floors, the rise and fall of laughter, the gentle murmur of voices sharing the details of their day. Gabriel was no longer the man Amelia had first seen crouched by a trash bin, trying to salvage both food and dignity. He was different now. He carried himself with quiet confidence, not arrogance, but with the calm strength of someone who had been given back a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. And he gave that strength freely to Amelia and Lila. In the mornings, he poured cereal with Lila at the table, the two of them inventing silly games to see who could finish their breakfast first. In the afternoons, he worked side by side with Amelia, helping with errands, carrying the burden she had long carried alone. In the evenings, he often found himself reading stories to Lila, her small head resting on his shoulder as her eyes grew heavy. And when the house grew quiet at night, when Lila finally drifted off to sleep, there were moments shared between Amelia and Gabriel, simple, unhurried moments. The brushing of hands as they cleared the dishes, a smile exchanged across the room, saying more than words could, a silence not empty, but full of comfort. Amelia sometimes found herself watching him from the doorway as he tucked Lila in, his large, steady hand smoothing the blanket over her tiny frame. It was then she realized this was no longer about compassion or chance. It had become something deeper, something neither of them could have planned. For Gabriel, the greatest gift was not the roof over his head or the meals on the table. It was belonging. It was a feeling of being needed, of being loved, of being seen not as a burden, but as a man, a protector, a father figure. He had found, at last, what he'd been searching for without even knowing it, a home. One evening, as the three of them walked again through quiet streets, the air was filled with the same golden glow of the street lamps that had witnessed their first confession. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. Lila swung happily between them, her small hands clasped in theirs, her laughter ringing out like a promise of tomorrow. Amelia looked at Gabriel, and he looked back, and in that silent exchange, they both understood. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of one. A story built on second chances, on compassion that bloomed into love, on a family formed not by circumstance, but by choice. As they walked beneath the stars, Amelia's heart was lighter than it had been in years. Gabriel's steps were steadier, rooted in purpose once more. And Lila, sandwiched between them, smiled up at the world as if it had given her the very thing she had wished for all along. The man who had once been a stranger was no longer on the outside looking in. The woman who had once thought her heart was closed had found it open again. And the little girl who had asked a question that changed everything now held the hands of both her heroes. Together, they walked forward into a future unknown, but no longer feared. Because now, whatever came, they would face it not as three separate souls, but as a family, a home found, a family made, and a love that would carry them through every season yet to come. And so, what began with a simple question from a curious little girl turned into a story of compassion, second chances, and a family being built from the heart. Amelia found love again, Gabriel found a home, and Lila found the father figure she had always wished for. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that warms the soul. And I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Amelia's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever.